One of the most beloved franchises in recent times when it comes to video games, guys, is certainly the Mass Effect franchise. This is a game that has spanned over the course of time, and we've been seeing a number of additions to this franchise and have been yearning as a franchise, or I should say more so of a fan base of the franchise, wanting a continuation. And so in this last segment of the show, I want to talk about Mass Effect 4 versus that of a Mass Effect Andromeda 2 and kind of compare these two as far as, what the fan base wants, which I think is all obvious to all of us, like which one we want, but at the same time really kind of breaking it down to, is it really all cut and dry, one way or another? Or are there things in between here that we got to look at to really kind of make a good decision on this? And kind of wondering, what are the developers thinking of doing at this point? So let's kind of talk about it, guys. In an article that was written by Bryn Gelbert of Game Rant, since the launch of Mass Effect Andromeda in 2017, the sci-fi franchise that defined a generation of video games has laid mostly dormant. DLC and future plans for Mass Effect were canceled as BioWare became a studio in transition. It still is. This year, Anthem proved to be a flop that had a nearly impossible time growing a player base. It seemed like BioWare is a studio in the middle of a big pivot or about to be shuttered. However, it does seem like sequels to Dragon Age and Mass Effect are in the works in various stages of production. So I guess the big question is, guys, is Mass Effect 4 or Andromeda 2? The obvious answer to what fans want from Mass Effect is, of course, Mass Effect 4. But what exactly does it mean to make a game called Mass Effect 4 after the finality and controversy of the ending of Mass Effect 3? What does this mean as more than just a branding move? It's hard not to wonder which plot lines Mass Effect 4 would explore. After the cataclysmic ending of Mass Effect 3, there would have to be a major time jump to tell a story about rebuilding the Milky Way galaxy. Ideally, this game could showcase how the choices Shepard and his crewmate in the original trilogy impacted the state of the world in the future. That means, unfortunately, fan-favorite crew members likely can't be brought back to a new story. There just aren't any great ways to justify it narratively. So, here's the first thing I'll say. Shepard's story, guys, is essentially over in my opinion. I don't think that they should try to milk this thing. Like, you shouldn't be playing as Shepard anymore. I mean, if he's going to be somehow come back in the story, he should be a side character. He should not be the main character. They should be moving onwards to someone else. And that's why the one thing I really liked about Andromeda was it being kind of different galaxy, different characters, felt like familiar to Mass Effect, but certainly just felt like it was different in its own way. And that's why I wish Andromeda did good, because if it did, not that we would get an Andromeda 2, but we could have like both worlds kind of merge in the form of like the Mass Effect, the trilogy as well as Andromeda. Obviously, we didn't get that. In Andromeda, the series jumped to a new galaxy and didn't actually introduce many new species and still focused largely on humans. A big leap for Mass Effect 4 would be to take the franchise to a new place in the universe, a galaxy in a different time and place with new aliens and societies with new problems to solve. I agree with that. For the purpose of EA trying to sell a Mass Effect game again after the bad blood that Andromeda has caused, Mass Effect 4 is the easy prediction. It is direct and to the point, implying that this is a reboot of the franchise and a return to the greatness of the numbered games. So I agree. Basically, what could happen here, it's easy for EA to write Andromeda off as just a spin-off. Mass Effect 4, that's the game that's the game that the fans want. But with the name comes great pressure. If Mass Effect 4 were to fail, it is hard to see the franchise existing beyond what could be the final attempt to make it relevant again. I mean, look, I kind of disagree with it. I think that everyone's going to have their opinions on Mass Effect, on a Mass Effect 4, regardless how you look at it. I think that making a different galaxy, new characters and things of that nature, I think that's the way that they need to go about this. Don't be bringing back Shepard. If you do, bring him back as like a side character. Don't make him, one of the main characters, or just have like a really crazy reveal at the end of the game to really keep you wanting to play more. And that's where they could continue onwards with like Mass Effect 5 and so on and so forth. it makes a lot of sense for Mass Effect to return to a numbered format to make Andromeda seem like more of an outlier. Mass Effect 4 would likely have to be a huge departure for the story and setting, but remember that there were plot lines that didn't quite get wrapped up in Andromeda. It's safe to say that some had barely even started to develop, with information being held for planned DLC and future sequels. Originally, DLC was planned for Mass Effect Andromeda that could wrap up the Quarian arc, that plot line that was introduced in the game. This was a big part of the game that felt unfinished in a sense, and the developers never got a chance to wrap up that storyline. There is interesting room to make a sequel here that could be interesting. Resolving this issue would not necessarily mean making Mass Effect Andromeda 2 if somehow the next Mass Effect game could incorporate or make reference to the fate of the Quarian arc. So, look, the failures of Mass Effect Andromeda were not just on the technical aspects of the game being a bit of a mess. The characters were mostly human and largely not as compelling as the characters of the original trilogy. In many ways, the crew defines a Mass Effect game. It's why a game like Mass Effect 2, which is largely not concerned with an overwhelming, overarching plot, but solving problems for crew members, can be one of the strongest games of the decade. A sequel to Andromeda would have to pick up with these characters many players didn't care for, a setback BioWare wouldn't have to deal with if it just made a new game. And I agree. I mean, look, did I like Andromeda? I thought it was okay. Like, I didn't think it was great, but I thought it was okay. I think I liked it probably more than a lot of people did. I thought it was just different. There was something there. I felt like there was something there. It just didn't fully connect with everyone. And it didn't fully connect with me either. But I liked it probably more than a lot of people liked Andromeda, guys. I wouldn't say it's better than, the original trilogy, but I thought it was okay, like, for what it was. Now, for what it was, it feels like it should have been just kind of like a side story, that was just there, right? That, existed with the rest of the Mass Effect games. But when they were trying to make those statements that this is a part of the story and everything, that they want to make a full, continue the franchise with Andromeda, I just don't think that was a good move for them, not knowing what the reception was going to be for Andromeda. So I think, unfortunately, Andromeda needs to be kind of kicked to the curb, essentially. And I think that Mass Effect 4 has to be the next thing, or just Mass Effect, like a Mass Effect reboot completely would, or I should say a soft reboot, that would probably really help the franchise kind of take the next steps forward. But Mass Effect 4 just makes more sense, guys. It just does. Anything we see from BioWare following the response to Andromeda will, without a doubt, be a completely new game from anything in the Mass Effect universe. But chances of it trying to go down the rabbit hole by trying to launch a whole new sub-brand again, entitling the game Mass Effect 4 would allow the game to gather immediate hype and also put it in a good place to start a new trilogy in the vein of the numbered Star Wars movies. But a bold move would be to break the chains of the cover shooter era that so thoroughly defined the era when the Mass Effect trilogy was originally released. The only way to have a Mass Effect game break new ground would be to change the combat mechanics. Fans want an RPG with the dialogue options and role-playing depth of the Mass Effect trilogy, but in terms of what it can play like, the future is flexible. Possibilities would take the game in either direction of action or strategy still remain on the table. If you were to ask me, guys, I feel like action and strategy are kind of like, I would love to see those merge, but if you were to ask me, like, which one, I like the action games more, personally, as far as, like, this type of game, right? Strategy games are incredible, but I think that action for this is going to do more for the franchise than strategy would. I mean, you look at games like that are coming out, like Valorant. We talked about that earlier in the show. We talked about games like Call of Duty and CSGO and all these other games. Sure, they take strategy, but they're action games. And I think that this is a title, kind of like Halo, that would be very much so, it would be going in a great direction if you were doing more action than strategy as far as like the options and such that you make within the world. So it's going to be interesting, to say the least, what they decide to do, that being BioWare, moving into Mass Effect 4 or Andromeda 2. I would have to say, guys, most likely we're going to be seeing Mass Effect 4 or just a Mass Effect soft reboot. And as far as When are we going to see that? Well, it's probably going to be in somewhere in the foreseeable future. I don't think that we need to worry like about it never coming around ever again. Like lots of people thought that Mass Effect was done after Mass Effect 3. Now that we have been hearing more and more word about the continuation of the franchise, I think it's going to be coming out here at some point in the future. That's probably the next thing that they're working on over at BioWare. So my assumption, guys, would be that we're going to hear confirmation of maybe a title as to what it's going to be called either late this year or early next year. And then we'll probably really be able to get our hands on the game probably in late 2021, maybe early 2022. It'll be interesting without a doubt, guys. And I hope you guys are excited about it because I'm really excited to see more of Mass Effect and just don't want to see this game die. I think there's so much to explore with it. It reminds me of like StarCraft, reminds me of Star Wars, all of these games that have like just vast amounts of different planets, galaxies, things of that nature really need to be explored. But with that being said, everyone, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Would you want Mass Effect 4, or are you in the minority and you would want Mass Effect Andromeda 2? Let me know in the comment section below. And for more Mass Effect 4 content and videos, stay here with Zero TV.